Welcome to Advanced Slicing, where we're going to show you how to tweak a few important settings to get more out of your prints. First up, layer height, and rightfully so, as it's one of the most common settings that you'll be using. So what does it affect and when should we change it? As the name suggests, this setting is going to change how thick of a layer will the printer actually extrude at to build up your part. Just for some ballpark numbers, most printers will be able to achieve a layer height between 0.05mm and 0.3mm. Layer height is going to be a huge factor when it comes to the detail in your part and print times. It's a pretty straightforward trade-off between the two. So let's say we had a 10mm tall part and we printed at 0.1mm layer height. We're going to need 100 layers to construct that part. If we did that part at 0.2mm layer height, we only need 50 layers to build up that part. And the printer puts down these different thickness layers at about the same speed, so half the amount of layers means half the print times. So does that mean half the amount of layers equals half the detail? Sort of. It means you're going to get half the detail along your vertical z-axis. Alright, here is the golden rule of thumb. Always print at the largest layer height that you can get away with. The best way to explain this is with examples, so let's jump into Prusa Slicer and have a bit of a play around. So look at this part. Now I picked this one because it demonstrates that vertical z-axis detail that I mentioned before. This part has a mounting hole here which lies in the vertical plane, so it's going to be greatly affected by our choice in layer height. So we're only going to be changing our layer height through these presets here. When you change the layer height, there is a whole bunch of other settings that need to be changed along with it, but these presets do all that hard work for you, so just stick with them for now. Let's start on our thickest layer we can, 0.3mm, and slice it. If we inspect our part, the bottom here looks fine. There's some big thick print lines thanks to our large layer height, but that's no biggie. But this mounting hole here, well, I guess it kind of resembles a circle. Now for the purpose this part is going to be used for, this is not nearly enough detail. We're going to need something a bit more geometrically accurate. Let's bump the layer height down to 0.15mm. Let's pick something in the middle. And look at that. That is looking a lot better and it looks a lot more like a circle now. Let's have a bit of a play around and select the smallest layer height we can at 0.05mm. And as you can see, there is a bit of an improvement, but we're starting to get some diminishing returns here. Now we could print at a 0.05 layer height, but I need 20 of these parts. It's going to take 40 minutes per part to print, and I have 12 other people waiting to use the printers after me, so we're not going to do that. So this is where we're going to say, it would be really nice to print at that really fine detail layer height, but we can get away with 0.15. And we're going to do that because it reduces our print time from 40 minutes to 30 minutes. In other words, we can afford to lose that little bit of accuracy by picking a thicker layer height. Let's take a look at another part. This is the housing for a kind of handheld torch. So off the bat, let's set it to 0.3mm layer height. Yep, that actually looks pretty good. I'd usually leave it here at this point because I don't see anything wrong with printing at this layer height. Now on this part we do have some holes that we need to keep nice and geometrically accurate, but they lie on the horizontal plane this time and have nothing to do with the z-axis. So layer height is not going to affect its detail in this situation. Now just for example's sake, we're going to drop it down to 0.2 and 0.1mm. As you can see, there isn't actually much gain in terms of accuracy or detail on these thinner layers. The only thing we've gained is greatly increased print time, so we're going to leave it on 0.3mm. So that's our rule of thumb. Print at the thickest layer height that you can get away with. Because most of the time, a thinner layer height will yield diminishing returns. On most parts, you will rarely notice the difference between 0.1 and 0.2mm layer heights. But there will be times where you need the detail and the accuracy that a thinner layer height will provide, so use it when you need it, but only when you actually need it. Alright, we're now ready for the big guns. In most slices nowadays, layer height does not have to be the same across the whole part. We can dynamically assign it where we need the detail. So this is the part from before. We're going to set it to 0.3mm, and we can see that as exactly before. Some sections it works, but in others we need more detail. So we're going to select the object, then hit the variable layer height tool here. First, we're going to do this process manually, and then I'll show you how to do it automatically. On the right here is a graph of the current assigned layer height, denoted by this blue line here. If we hover over it, 0.3mm, yep, that checks out. When we hover over the graph, we can see that it lights up the corresponding section on the part preview. With left and right click, we can decrease and increase the layer height on this section, and we can see that it changes color to represent this. Now I'm just going to paint in around the mounting holes here, where we need the detail of a thinner layer height. And we can see on the graph here that our layer height has now dropped down to something a bit smaller. If we slice our part, we can see that our circle now has an incredible level of detail in this mounting hole here, yet it only takes 8 minutes to print because the rest of the part is going to be printed at 0.3 millimeters. We've got the same amount of detail as the ultra detailed part, but without the 40-minute print time. And we're even quicker than the 0.15 millimeter time, yet we have more detail where we need it. Let's do this automatically now. So we're going to go back, we're going to hit reset, then we will click the adaptive button here, which will automatically apply the thin layers to where the part needs it. We can also drag this quality speed slider around to adjust how strict the slicer will be in assigning these thin layers. And if we hit slice, we can see that Prusa Slicer has done a bit better than our hack job and applied it to where it really needs it. And this has shaved off a few more minutes of our print time. A great example of this tool and layer heights is on spheres. Here we have two half spheres printed at 0.05 and 0.3 millimeters. And we can see that on the sides of the spheres here, there is little difference between the two, and it's pretty accurate. But as we reach the top, it gets a little bit choppy. And we can see this reflected in Prusa Slicer. If we hit it with the adaptive layer tool, we can see that it keeps it thick at the bottom, but then weans it into thinner layers at the top where it needs that detail. And we can get the detail comparable to the 0.5 millimeter sphere, but printed 7 times faster. Just have a play around with the adaptive height tool because it's such a handy thing to have and it's the best way to just learn how to use it. But remember, you don't always need to use it. Some parts will be fine to leave on the default presets, and with experience you'll learn when you're going to need to use the tool and when you're not.